Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Unmasking. And this week we have a super, super special guest. I told her before we hopped on that I'm kind of fangirling over here because I have followed her and her sister for quite some time now. They've been on Brene Brown's podcast and Glennon Doyle's podcast and the 10% Happier podcast, to name just a few. Her name is Amelia Nagoski, and she co-wrote Burnout, and I'm holding it here in my hands right now. Sarah has her copy over here. And before we get started, I just wanted to
I only have the workbook,
Ooh,
sorry.
oh, the workbook.
yeah,
Yeah.
very cool.
I did not know that there was a workbook. Okay.
Yeah,
I
that's
will
newer, yeah.
immediately adds to cart. Okay, awesome. So we are so grateful for Amelia to come on this podcast. She has a DMA, stands for Doctorate of Musical Arts. She is the co-author with her sister Emily of the New York Times best-selling Burnout, The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle, and the Burnout Workbook. It's right here. Her job is to run around waving her arms and making funny noises and generally doing whatever it takes to help singers get in touch with their internal experience. She lives in New England with her husband and her 2 rescue dogs. So thank you, Amelia, for being here and
Yay.
giving us your time.
It's my pleasure.
Oh, awesome. So I just wanted to really jump right in. And I discovered this book. I shared with you, my own therapist recommended it to me. And when I got into it and started reading it, I really identified with so much of what you and your sister have to say. And I'm just going to talk about emotional exhaustion right off the bat, because I think, it's near the holidays. We're all feeling it. You and your sister, you two define burnout by emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and decreased sense of accomplishment. And this was actually coined by Herbert Freudenberger in 1975. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was the first clinical researcher to take on the idea of burnout, yes.
Okay.
Very cool.
Awesome. Awesome. So I thought where we could start is just have us tell you a little bit about your story and what led you to co-author this book with your sister.
Yeah, it started with Emily's first book, the New York Times bestselling Come As You Are, The Surprising New Science That Will Transform Your Sex Life. Yeah, and she was writing that book, and it was a book of, about the science of women's sexuality, and she uh, took it on tour and, just talked to hundreds, thousands of women about the science of women's sexuality. And they'd come, line up, get book signed, and, famous Emily Nagoski, and they'd say, I loved all that sex science. That was great. But, the one thing in that book that just really changed everything for me was that one part of a chapter about stress and feelings. And she was pretty astonished by that because, it was a book about the science of women's sexuality. She didn't think that the feelings were going to be the star of that show.
Sure.
So when she told me that, I was not surprised at all. And it's pretty much because I'm a conductor. I had already learned that learning to feel and process your emotions is a learnable skill, because I had learned it in my conservatory training for the purposes of performance on stage. What I had not learned was that this is a skill that's transferable to day to day. And when I did learn that, which I learned really from her book, it changed my life. It saved my life. So I reminded her of that, and she said, we should write a book about that. That's Burnout. It's the book that I needed when I was not even hanging on by my fingernails anymore, but actively falling into a cliff. It was the information that I needed to save myself.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that with us. I can imagine if you look back now and you look at the 3, components: emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and decreased sense of accomplishment. You had you not recognized that, by the time you were in the hospital, how was that for you? Just that whole experience.
Well, how it happened was that I was in, I think, my 3rd year of doctoral school, and I was fine. I'm fine. How am I? I'm fine. How are you? I had no idea that I was overwhelmed and swamped by stress. And to the point of the unmasking topic of the podcast, what I learned from the information in Burnout is that the main thing that was killing me was suppressing my own identity
Yeah.
in my doctoral program, because people might not know this, but classical music is still one of the most old-fashioned, conservative,
Mm.
male-dominated, patriarchal, white supremacist fields that still exists.
Mhm.
Because it claims, and it's like okay with focusing on dead white men composers. Really
Mhm.
is
Mhm.
and the idea of that should or could be opened up to anything else um, is offensive to a lot of academics in
Yeah.
musicology. And the idea that I, as a conductor, was a female-bodied, emotional person was I had to suppress my own intelligence, my own skills, so as not to make these men uncomfortable. And and the process of squelching that over and over consistently for a number of years created inflation in my body, which
Mhm.
the first chapter in Burnout is about how emotions, especially stress, are
Yeah.
are cycles that happen in your body. They're physiological processes that can
Yes.
have horrendous consequences if we don't let them do what
Mhm.
they do. And I
Yes.
was not letting them do what they do because it was not. I mean, these are people who had the power to kick me out of the program. So
Mhm.
if I let my feelings do what they did and wanted to do, I felt like it was not safe for me to achieve my goals in that context.
Yeah.
Did I answer the question? I lost track a
I
little
think
bit.
you did. I
Okay.
think
Yeah,
you
you answered
did.
it beautifully. Yeah,
Yeah.
and just hearing what you were saying too is I think a lot of times, our bodies when we feel like we feel threatened or, we feel stigmatized, our bodies are trying to tell us that. But again, when it comes to masking, as women, I especially think that we learn from a very young age that we want to be seen and not heard and not disrupt anyone.
Mhm.
And then you add on top of that, neurodivergence, all of these things you're trying to stay in the lane and make things smooth, particularly in a situation where we're a woman in a very dominant man profession.
Yeah.
That can be a lot. And so I think it's amazing that the book talks a lot about listening to physically what your body's trying to tell you, because
Yeah.
I think that's the first line of like, something's not right here. But as women, we tend to just continue on, and we actually are a lot stronger than men. No offense to men, but we are. And our bodies, our
Yeah.
bodies, we can handle, pain, childbirth, all these different things.
Mhm.
So we just keep going and going and going. And then burnout happens. So
Yeah.
thank you for
Yeah,
sharing
without
that.
us having even realized it. And
Yeah.
in
Sure.
retrospect, I was able to look back because I wasn't diagnosed with, I finished my doctorate in
Mm-hmm.
2013. I was diagnosed with autism in 2022, I
Mhm.
think.
Okay.
2021 maybe. Anyway, it wasn't until a lot later. So a lot of my understanding of what happened to me in my doctoral program happened way in the future, way after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
So um, understanding now that I was autistic that whole time and
Yeah.
like why I had such a hard time understanding my professors and why they had such a hard time with me and why I couldn't figure out what the rules were and they wouldn't like tell me the rules and they thought I should
Mhm.
just know what the rules were.
Mhm.
That explains a lot. I also in retrospect have come to identify as agender, so
Okay.
I never identified as a woman, like, since
Okay.
childhood.
Yeah.
Turns out that I didn't know this until, like, maybe 2 years ago.
Mhm.
I didn't, like, identify that this was a thing, but in retrospect, one of the reasons it was so hard for me to understand that the treatment I was getting was sexism, was misogyny, was because I didn't know. I didn't know that I was a woman. Like, I knew that people
Yeah.
perceived me as a woman, but I didn't
Mhm.
really understand that people really treated me differently because of this thing that they saw me as, but I didn't ever, like, see myself as that, so I didn't really connect the two
Sure.
until I started hanging out with some really, like, active feminist academics who were
Mhm.
studying women's studies at the doctoral level,
Mm-hmm.
and they started talking about fem and I was like, "Oh."
Yeah.
it's sex. Oh, they think I'm a woman. So, yeah. So, yeah, in retrospect, yes. And as part of my autistic uh, neuropsych evaluation, you take a masking test, right? That's a sort of a standard part of the autistic evaluation.
Mhm.
And my masking score was the highest my evaluator had ever seen in her
Wow.
professional career. And she was like, I'm really worried for the implications that this has on your well-being.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, too late for that. I already been hospitalized twice for the
Yeah.
results of too much masking. And it is the
Sure.
most dangerous thing about being autistic, especially as like a,
Mhm.
what they call the high functioning female
Mhm.
autistic, they
Mhm.
say, that, this high achieving, super intelligent, female bodied kind of autistic person tends to be like very, very high masking. And yeah, that's the one trait of autism that is directly correlated
Yeah.
with negative health outcomes.
Wow. I'm
Yeah.
learning so much just
Yeah, I
in
learned a
this.
I
lot
know.
too.
Yeah, yeah, no kidding. So I guess, that kind of leads me to my next question about, you talk in the book about stress versus stressors and
Yes.
completing the cycle, completing the emotional cycle so that it does not end up in burnout. How do you look at that differently now than maybe before?
This was maybe the most important thing I learned in the process of writing the book is I thought while I was in my doctoral program,
Mhm.
I'll just push through until I graduate and then I'll be fine. Uh, that is incorrect.
Yeah.
Because first of all, if I had tried to do that, I would not have made it to the end of my doctoral program. I was less than halfway through when I was already hospitalized with stress-induced illness. If I had tried to push through and just like sacrifice myself on the altar of my professor's egos
Mhm.
until they gave me a piece of paper saying I was done, I would not have succeeded in that. So the good news is that you can separate the thing that causes your stress from the actual stress that is the physiological cycle that's happening in your body. So
Yeah.
that was really good news for me because it meant I could start to deal with the stress in my body and to recover my physical well-being before I finished the degree, which made me healthy enough to actually accomplish that goal. So, what I learned is that stress is a cycle that happens in your body. It evolved many, many long periods of time ago
Mhm.
in like, proto mammals, where the stress response, all emotions are cycles, but the stress response is the one we were talking about specifically in
Mhm.
the book. And that evolved in a context where, your little mammalian creatures down by the river getting water for the rest of the community and looks across the river and there's a hippopotamus and it's literally the most dangerous animal in the world,
Yeah.
arguably. And it sees us in its territory, so it's running at us. And so what happens in our body is the stress response. It is a chemical cascade, a physiological response of neurotransmitters, hormones, like things that change every system in your body to
Mhm.
prepare you for fight or flight,
Mhm.
which in the case of a hippopotamus, flight is the thing
Flight.
to do.
Mhm.
You want to get out of its territory, so it's okay with you. So
Yeah.
it changes your heart rate, makes it faster. Your blood pressure makes it increase to deliver more oxygen. Your breathing gets faster and deeper to get more oxygen to deliver to your muscles to make you stronger and faster. Your skin changes. So you might feel the hairs raise up, like on the back of your neck or the back of your arms. But even deeper than that, your oil glands and your sweat glands change. So you're sweating more and your oil secretions change,
Mhm.
and other sensations that are happening below the level of conscious awareness. You're not even aware that your immune system has gotten the message. Just like your heart, just like your lungs, your immune system has gotten the message that we need all the energy for the fighting and the flighting.
Yeah.
So if you could just take a back seat, we don't care about malaria right now because there's this hippo.
Mhm.
You're not aware that your reproductive system has gotten this message. Hippopotamus, who cares about babies and your reproductive system takes a lot of energy even when you're not using it. So
Yeah.
your
Mhm.
reproductive system takes this moment to be like, okay, cool, I'm gonna take a back seat for a minute. You can have all that energy for the muscles and the fighting and the flighting. So that's what happens. You run, you leap, you jump, you climb. You are powered by all the energy in your body, by all those systems that have, temporarily having a little nap,
Mhm.
and you make it to the, the cleft in the rock, and you're hiding, and you've achieved, and you look out and you see the hippo is satisfied. You have left its territory and it's smugly walking away. Got rid of that person. And you feel, it might be a variety of different things. It might be exultation and celebration that you are alive and you have made it. It might be
Mhm.
like a sudden peaceful calm and security. It might be you want to jump up and down and share the story with your friends and family. Whatever the feeling is, it's a return to your baseline wellness where all the systems come back online to do the things they were doing before because you have used up the stress response by doing the thing the stress response has prepared you to do. And that's the complete stress response cycle. Something initiates the stress response, your body floods with all of the stress juice, the neurotransmitters, the adrenaline, the glucocorticoids, the cortisol, and then you act on it. That's step 3, using up all the stuff, and then you return to baseline. That's step 4, the complete stress response cycle. And the good news is you can do that not necessarily exactly in response to just the hippo, because one of the problems now is that the kinds of things that cause us stress, that initiate that stress response cycle, are not things that you can fight or flee from. You can't escape them using your body. So you have to stand in line and fill out forms and smile and be polite to somebody who you feel like doesn't deserve your polite smile. But that's the safest thing to do. That's the polite society thing to do. So good news, you don't have to do it right in that moment. You don't have to punch some jerk in the face because he catcalls you in order to complete the stress response cycle. You can ignore it and safely move on and not escalate the situation, get someplace safe, and punch a punching bag instead. And your body doesn't know the difference. All your body knows is that you have demonstrated that it has the capacity to move you from danger to safety the way it was evolved to.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, that's really, I love that analogy. I also, as I'm listening to that, I'm wondering if a lot of times we kind of suppress that. And what we end up doing is when we're masking, we don't allow ourselves to feel that. So then that's where the burnout comes, right? Because what we're
Yeah.
doing now is, okay, I'm uncomfortable here. I feel scared here. This is a new situation, or this is something where I'm uncomfortable, but I'm not going to listen to myself because so and so over here is okay. And so over here is doing it okay. So now I need to do it okay. And so I feel like that's where a lot of it can come, especially as, I don't want to place gender on it, but really for women, a lot of women, we are just taught to be compliant, to not listen to our bodies, to go and do the polite thing, to not question all of that. So when I was hearing that analogy, I was thinking about, because I'm a child therapist and I see all of these kids and how I'm trying to condition them to listen to their bodies and to say it's okay, if your body feels uncomfortable, to listen to that. But I think overall in our society for so long, we've been taught not to. We've been taught to, as we talk about the hippo, is we've been taught to just be like, okay, the hippo's there. I'm just, instead of just going into that, fight or flee, we're now in a fawn phase where we're just going to please and figure it out.
100%.
So
Yeah. And indeed, it is, I think, gendered, but it's not a matter of like what your gender is. It's that we've coded certain behaviors as feminine and others as masculine. So
very
like
true.
fear is feminine and anger is masculine. Sadness is feminine, right? So even men feel the need to mask those more tender, vulnerable emotions. And that
Very
leads to
true.
burnout in them too. And they feel like they also need to put on a mask of increased masculinity, of that denies the more tender, vulnerable, loving parts of themselves, when, lots of men will benefit from having like a caring, nurturing relationship with their children, for example. But it's, kind of thought of as not butch enough. You have to be like you play ball with your boy. You don't, put him
Stop
to bed and
crying.
read him a
Yeah.
story.
Man
Right.
up.
Exactly.
All of that. Yes.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah. So anytime that we are required to suppress emotion, which, yes, is coded feminine because men are sort of allowed to be angry in public, whereas women are when we are angry in public. And it's not just women, it's the less you conform to the socially constructed ideal, which is straight, cis, male, educated. In America, it's English speaking as a first language. It's being Christian. It's a very narrow socially constructed ideal. And if you don't conform to any of those things, the less you conform, the less you are allowed to have access to power, to have access to your full self, to exist safely in space. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It makes me
Absolutely.
think too, when I was in grad school, I had one professor and she told me that I was bossy. And I told her, well, if I was a man, you would say I was a leader. And I actually
Yeah.
said that to her. And I think that that's just very true. You know, I think it's just, there's this very dichotomous way of thinking when it comes to gender, men and women. And I love that you also pulled that in. Men do need to be in touch with their feelings. They do need to be able to express that. And that's why you have so many people who now, you know, are men that numb themselves through addiction and through drinking and all of these different things because they are not allowed to feel. And you don't talk about that. You don't go and talk about those feelings with someone else.
Yeah.
You know, but then girls, if they're yelling or upset, oh, that's just an angry woman. That's a angry woman speaking her mind. So it's, you know, and then all of that just leads to burnout too, because you feel so isolated and alone. And I
Yeah.
imagine, you know, how was it for you? I know you said you were late diagnosed as an adult, but how was it for you as a child with this? Like, do you feel like from a very young age, you just learned to just mask your way through school and everything?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. So Emily and I are identical twins. We're genetically born with the same genes. We were raised in the same household, but we both experienced very different relationships with masking. Emily has a relationship with her body and with her internal experience that is really loud and communicative. She understands what she needs, and it's so loud she's incapable of ignoring it. So she's always been louder than me, and got a lot of cork it from our parents, a lot of like
Okay.
cork it. And I was always like, Emily, just cork it. It's so easy. Just be quiet and let them ignore you. Like,
Yeah.
just
Figure it
just
out.
don't. Because my like default state is like a shutdown state. I first experienced clinical depression when I was 14, which is like just a clinical extension of being shut down all the time. Because I learned so young that feelings are bad and what my body has to tell me is wrong and that that's not how we act, and that I was very invested in learning what the rules were so that I could follow them. And my only real memories of like being enraged as a child were when I was put in positions where I was getting two contradictory sets of rules, like from the kids telling me what it was required to fit in, and the adults telling me what was required me to be like good behavior. Yeah, the idea that there were rules to follow made me really happy. The recognition that there were contradictory sets of rules that you can't follow both, which of course is the America Ferrera speech from Barbie is like the
Yes.
definition of existing as a female-bodied person in the Western world is this contradictory. You can never be anything. You are always too much something and also at the same time too little of it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
I
Perfect.
really wanted to know what the
Perfect
rules
sense.
were. I am great at following rules,
Yeah.
at following a routine, at getting and staying on a schedule. It's how I got through school, right? Is I
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
follow instructions until the cows come home. But when the instructions are these unspoken, sort of mysterious, everybody just magically understands social rules thing, it is, it's so, I'm left feeling like I have nothing in my brain. Like I don't even know. Like, you know.
Yeah.
Hmm?
Yeah. Absolutely.
I'm sorry that
Absolutely.
wasn't a complete sentence, but like,
No, it made
Oh,
sense.
no. Well,
there it is.
predictability is safety. And so when things are
Yes, it is.
unpredictable, you're definitely going to feel um, out of place
Yeah.
or, threatened and that's when the trauma response comes in. So, and then
Yeah.
you just smile and you start
Mhm.
masking through that uncomfortable situation. And I feel like the more you condition your body to do that, the more you start losing sight of who you really are.
Yeah.
Um,
And I really maintained that masking as a default until my junior year of college when I had a conducting professor who talked about emotions. And I was like, wait a minute. What are you talking about emotions? I thought this was a skill. That has nothing to do
Mhm.
with my feelings. Um, and I didn't understand it, and I was left wondering what all that was until 5 years after I graduated college. I went back for my master's degree and went to a conservatory where people talked explicitly about who you are and your vulnerability and your authenticity as being inherent to your art. And I was like, and that really cracked me open in a way that like I cried my way through my master's degree. Like I was just
Yeah.
it was those stories about how the conservatory, like in the movie Whiplash, like we're gonna break you down to build you up. It was
Sure.
not unlike that. I was
Wow.
I was a broken mess, but it
Mhm.
also broke me in a way that left me ready to put some pieces back together in a better and stronger form.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
healed yourself through it.
Yeah, I have said many times I learned how to be a person on the podium before I learned how to do it in real life.
Wow.
And Emily and
Wow.
I, after she finished a master's in counseling and I finished a master's in conducting, we both sort of laughed about the idea that we had both gotten master's degrees in how to listen and feel feelings.
Mhm.
It's like, we probably both needed to learn that.
Yeah.
Sure, sure. It makes me think about the part in your book where you talk about one of the ways to heal is to rewrite your origin story, that's
Yes.
one of the activities. I think this was in the human giver syndrome section of the book too. So I can't quite remember, but I wanted to see if you could share a little bit about that for our listeners who are maybe kind of identifying with some of this right now and thinking like, yeah, maybe I have been burned out and I haven't recognized it. And now I'm seeing things for the first time with my family of origin and how I responded to things. Can you talk a little bit about that as a tool to heal?
Yeah, this is an evidence-based practice that comes from, clinical therapy.
Mhm.
The idea that when you look back at your own origin story, you can decide how you view it. And I have tried to do this from a lot of different perspectives. Like, what if I view myself as just a victim who had all these things go wrong and I was bullied and I was hurt and then I ended up where I am and that's amazing. What if I
Yeah.
look at it as my family of origin, my other relatives, they were victimized and hurt and I was stuffed into this situation and I was another thing that they had to do while they were working so hard and suffering so much and like they're also amazing for having accomplished what they accomplished and for getting me out alive. Oh my God, I was fed almost every day my whole
Mhm.
childhood. Like, that's
Yeah.
pretty great, considering the circumstances. Um, so when you rewrite your origin story, it teaches you more about who you are now and
Mhm.
can, in my case, made me focus on how amazing it is to have faced so many struggles. And indeed, we are all biased to uh, feel our challenges more intensely than we feel our blessings.
Mhm.
Um, and so that is a major part of like reconciling everything that was difficult for you and how it made you who you are. But at the same time, it can also do the opposite of like show you how many blessings you had, how many
Mhm.
gifts, how much advantage you had, even if it happened at the same time as challenges. Um, so starting, you get to decide what
Yeah.
your origin story is. If it's a matter of like your luck and the generosity of people around you, and or how many challenges you faced and how impressive it is that you made it to where you are. Did any of this make sense?
Yes.
Oh,
Okay, good.
yeah.
Yes. I'm
Yeah,
following.
because what I
Okay.
hear is just resilience, like looking at the resilience of you individually, subjectively, as people. Like, wow, I made it through something really difficult, and look at where I'm at now, and moving
Yeah.
forward, and then breaking the generational cycles too of, by looking at your own family of origin, how you want things to be different going forward with other relationships. I think is pretty cool
Yeah.
too. So yeah, it
Yeah,
definitely
it
Absolutely.
makes
is.
tons of sense.
You nailed it in the research. It is used as a tool for building resilience. Exactly.
Mm.
Yes, yes. And I think about that in relationship to the human giver syndrome. And that's what I wanted you to talk a little bit about next, if you could, because I think when you go back and you look at your origin story and you do some revisions, you can start to see patterns of people in your family. And I'm not to keep it so, I guess, limited to gender, but we look at human giver syndrome, and I look at the women in my family. I mean, we've got a long history of givers and doers to the point
Mhm.
where we didn't sit down for Thanksgiving dinner. We just watched Nana,
Yeah.
circle 100 times and anxious and always just giving to other people. Can you talk a little bit about how you feel about that now that you've done the research around human giver syndrome, and how do you navigate it? Because it's there, it's not going anywhere.
Yeah. Human giver syndrome is a term we adapted from a book called Down Girl, The Logic of Misogyny by a moral philosopher named Kate Manne, Manne.
Okay.
And it's a book of moral philosophy. So in this book, Dr. Mann posits a world that has two kinds of beings. It has human beings who have a moral obligation to be their humanity, to live it, to express it, to acquire whatever resources are necessary in order to accomplish that. And on the other side, there are human givers whose moral obligation is to give their humanity, their time, their lives, their bodies to the human beings. And remembering that it's from a book called Down Girl, The Logic of Misogyny, which group do you think she's saying the women are? Yeah,
Yeah.
no one has
Right.
ever questioned. We always know right away it's the
Right.
women.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, like you have got to keep coming back to gender because that is one of the dynamics and that is how she's talking about it. However, it is not just a gender dynamic, it's a power dynamic. So white people end up feeling like they're human beings, where people of color are put in the position of being human givers, able-bodied people versus people who have disabilities, or even just physical differences like limb differences that are not disabling, they just make them not conform to the bodies of the people around them.
Mhm.
Neurodivergence is another kind of difference that puts you in the category of human giver, while neurotypical people are in the role of human giver. Do you know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
we all live at the intersections of multiple differences and points of power. So we all live partially as human beings and partially as human givers. And the world, if it were made totally of human givers, would be an amazing place. Because a lot of people, especially women, respond to human giver syndrome thinking, oh, being a giver sounds great to me. I want to give myself to my family. It feels amazing. It feels like why I was put here on earth was to give of myself, to raise my kids, to support my family, to serve God, to leave a legacy. It feels like good and important. So how could that possibly be bad? And it is true that being a giver in the context of just being surrounded by givers would be amazing because it really is how humans evolved to exist, is in cooperative groups, giving
Yeah.
to each other. And if we were surrounded by other givers, nobody would ever fall through the cracks. Nobody would
That's
ever be
true.
asked to give more than they can because they would be cared for as much as they care.
Yeah.
It is in the dynamic of beings and givers together that givers are exploited because there is a group of people who feel entitled
Mhm.
to what the givers have to give. And how I have learned to this is just a dynamic that exists. That we can all see all around us all the time. And we can all think of the human beings in our lives who feel entitled to who we are and what we do, rather than feeling grateful or like caring for our well-being at the same time that they accept our labor or our love.
Mhm.
And how I have learned to deal with this, and the thing that Emily and I have found works, is to kind of divest from the relationships with the human beings in the world.
Mhm.
People who feel entitled to what you have, just be like, oh, I don't have to. I don't have to.
Yeah.
I don't have to give all that
Yeah.
I have to them.
Mhm.
Someone who does not give back to me is not entitled to receive from me in any kind of superior way. And
Yeah.
there are cases where, like, if that's your boss, it might affect your job and how well
Yeah.
you do professionally. But if you can find a place to work where your boss is not and does not feel a sense of entitlement to every moment of your day, that's going to be better for your overall well-being. That's what Emily and I have found works as a, one of the cures for living in a system that is so imbalanced.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Great. It's
it
a
is.
hard thing to practice, but a necessary thing to practice.
Yeah.
Especially so there's a part in the book where you talk about 42%.
Yeah.
How much rest is adequate?
Yeah.
Science says 42%. The percentage
Yeah.
of time your body and brain need you to spend resting. It's about 10 hours out of every 24. Okay.
Yeah. Which I think is a bargain, right? If you get
right.
enough sleep and enough food and enough time connecting with other people, because rest is not just sleep, it's anything that fuels you. And
Yeah.
it's such a bargain because all you have to give is like 42% of fueling up, and you get 58% back.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
take 10 hours to fuel yourself, and you get in return 14 hours of doing things. But it is more time than most people spend resting,
Sure.
unfortunately.
Sure. Is
Yeah.
this kind of the slow leak that you talk about in the book? Like that if we don't get that 10 hours, it starts to kind of create that slow leak?
Yeah. Because
Yeah.
we live in a world where rest is demonized, is
Mhm.
thought to be literally a sin. And this is
Oh,
part of
yeah.
like the American Puritan heritage, that like they thought that sleep was sloth, that if you slept more than 6 hours, you were lazy, which is, we know now, just biological impossibility. Like, you have to sleep, everybody. 7 to 9 hours is a very normal standard. For me, I have long COVID, and I have always been a 9-hour sleeper. And now that I am, physically disabled
Mhm.
with a condition that makes my mitochondria not produce an adequate amount of ATP,
Mhm.
I need 10, 11 hours
Mhm.
of sleep a day. So the fact that the world teaches us that if we only get 6 hours of sleep, we're not just like more productive, we're better human beings. We are
Yeah.
morally superior.
Mhm.
The less rest we take for ourselves, the better person we are. Like, you go to the water cooler. Do people still go to water coolers at their offices? I don't know, but I'm going to use
I
that as
don't
an illustration.
Yeah, that's a good
And if
one.
you say like, man, I slept for 9 hours last night and I feel amazing, your coworker is likely to say something like, oh, you got 9 hours of sleep. Good for you. Self-care is so important. I was
Yeah.
awake till 3 baking cupcakes for Becky's birthday party, but you
Hmm.
got 9 hours of sleep. Good for you. Self-care is so
Mhm.
important. And
Yeah.
it's
Must
this
be
like,
nice. Must
yeah,
be nice.
must be
Something.
nice to care about yourself and
Mhm.
take resources for yourself instead of sacrificing your well-being on the altar of someone else's convenience. Well, yeah, it's totally nice. I mean,
Mhm.
and the thing to
Yeah.
say in a moment like that is, yeah, it's amazing. And I'm so
Yeah.
sorry you had to stay up till 3. I hope tonight Becky guards your bedroom door and prevents anyone from waking you
I
up
know.
so that you get the sleep that you deserve.
Yes.
You could have just gone
Yes.
to the store and bought them. You could have bought her those cupcakes and taken
Yeah.
the rest.
That's
Yeah.
right.
And I get a lot of questions about like, but I have all this stuff on my to-do list. And then my first question is, who put that stuff on your list? Was it really you?
Mm-hmm.
If it was you,
Yeah.
why did you put it there? Does it
Sure.
need to be there? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it gets into that section in the book, about growing mighty at the very end, where when you talk about practices that you need to put in place for not burning out, I guess, right? And you
Yeah.
talk about the mad woman in the attic and why that is so hard for us, right?
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit about your experience with that? And then also what has helped you the most, would you say? Which practice, if someone's like, oh my gosh, I just don't know where to start?
Yeah. So the Mad Woman in the Attic is a literary trope
Mhm.
that comes from the book Jane Eyre, which is my favorite book. And spoiler alert for Jane Eyre, if you haven't read, the book is 200 years old now, so just go read it. Mr. Rochester, the main kind of hero guy, has a mad woman in his attic, and like, don't we all really? We all really just have somebody in our attic screaming at us about how terrible we are and what a bad
Yep.
person we are and how we owe the world better.
Mhm.
And that idea that we all have this like critical inner voice um, is often treated in kind of pop psychology or in cultural mainstream ideas as you need to turn that voice off or shut it off or ignore it. And that's not what the research says. And this is ooh, what's her name? Is it Kristen Sinema? Kristen? Oh God, no, that's a senator.
Is it Kristen Neff? Are you talking about for
Kristen Neff.
self-compassion?
Thank you. Yes,
Yeah,
Kristen Neff.
self-compassion.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh,
Her
Cindy.
self-compassion research
Yeah.
says very clearly that the thing to do is to listen to the critical voice,
Yeah.
not because you believe it, but because you care about this part of yourself. This voice is coming from inside you. It's
Mhm.
trying to protect you. Why is it telling you these things? What does it fear? And if you
Mhm.
turn toward this voice and listen to its fears and let it know that you're an adult now, that you can care for yourself, that you are not in the kind of danger that it's afraid of, and you can embrace it and befriend this mad woman, that's the thing that's going to help you heal. Not
Yeah.
brushing it off and pushing it away, but embracing it and holding it and caring for it in the way that you would a child who's freaking
Mhm.
out.
Mhm.
The most helpful strategy for me, the self-compassion is hard. That's why it's
Yes.
the last chapter in the
Mhm.
book. Um, uh, if I'm going to say one thing from the book that is the
Mhm.
most helpful, I'd say it's the 24/7 worksheet. It's in the
Mhm.
sleep chapter, which is where you just make a chart of all 24 hours in every day for
Mhm.
7 days in a week, and you make a chart of like what actually you do for all of your 100 and whatever hours it is in a week. And
Yeah.
then you make a chart of like an ideal of what you wish your week was like, where you actually blocked in time for all of the 42% rest that you need and all of the, the things that make you feel a sense of meaning and connection and purpose in your life. And you compare those two. That is the one thing that since finishing the book, graduating my doctoral program, being a professor, becoming disabled with long COVID, like that is the exercise that I have turned to in times when I'm like, things are getting too much. And
Mhm.
why? I turn to that
Mhm.
exercise and be like, oh, that is
Yeah.
why.
Yeah.
Um, just a really literal, just writing down of the list of like, what am I doing and what do I want to be doing and how do I reconcile those two? That exercise alone has prevented me from burning out ever again. Even as
Yeah.
the world has not exactly gotten easier to live in
Nope.
in
Yeah.
the past 12, 15 years, since I really burned out, the world has gotten harder, but I haven't burned out because I've had access to this information and these exercises. Um, if there was a thing in chapter 8 that
Mhm.
I think helps me the most, it was the exercise of writing a letter to an imaginary friend, to someone
Yeah.
who you thought needed a certain kind of help and support, and then rereading it and understanding that that letter is for you. And we can learn
Yes.
to treat ourselves as though we were someone external who we cared about. For a lot of people, that's much easier than practicing self-compassion like right
Mhm.
away. It's
Yes.
much easier to be compassionate toward other people.
Yes.
So if we practice that and then kind of like tell ourselves, oh, that's for us too. We deserve that. We're
Mhm.
not just here to be of service to others and to give care. We can also receive that care and compassion. That
Yeah.
feels great.
Yes.
Love
I
it.
love that. I love
And I
that.
think too, learning like everything you're saying as adults, modeling that for children, whether we're parents, aunts, uncles, teachers, whoever comes in contact, modeling that for these kids because they're the next generation. And what we want is them to listen to themselves, to honor their body,
Mhm.
to honor those voices, and even talk to themselves. I love how you just said that, is talk to yourself like you would talk to a friend. Would you say those same things to a friend? Then you
Yeah.
should talk to yourself. And that's why I love the letter too, because sometimes it's harder for people, I think, to just sit there and say it. So writing it, even if you're not a person who really, just writing it out, putting
Yeah.
it on paper, getting it out of your system is such a helpful tool. And I wanted to ask you too, Amelia, what advice would you give for a child, let's say, who doesn't have a diagnosis yet, or who feels different, or who tends, or whose parents are noticing things from your own childhood? What would you say to your younger self, knowing who you are now with burnout? Just kind of what would you say to your younger self, or what would you want someone to say to a child who is experiencing things like that?
I have done this exercise in therapy a few
Okay.
times, like
Yeah.
revisiting, younger undiagnosed me and like what
Mhm.
did they need to know?
Yeah.
And the thing they needed to know was that there's help coming and that
Mm.
there are resources available and we're going to learn how to do this. We're going to learn not just what the rules are, but when the rules don't apply, there's going to be
Mhm.
people around us who understand and support us and love us and give us more help even than we ask for, even than we knew was possible for us to receive. That is coming. That is available. It exists in the world. There's research that studies that show what the stuff is, but there's also human beings who are so good, who
Mhm.
are so sensitive and so generous that they are going to support us, not even in evidence-based ways, but just in ways that we didn't even know. Like, I'm very literal-minded, very science-minded. And 9-year-old me never knew that, like, stuff that isn't, proven by science could still be true. Like,
Mhm.
you're going to have love. You're going to have, like, huge, huge love that exists, and it's going to happen.
Ugh,
Oh, that's beautiful.
it is beautiful. It's hopeful. It's
It
hopeful.
is.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's
That's
very
what I would give
hopeful.
And we
9-year-old
need
me.
that right now.
And
There's
I am,
there's hope.
yeah.
It's
And
not always going to be like
with
this.
music too,
Yeah.
I
You're going to
wanted to
figure it
ask
out.
you, has that
Yeah.
been such a wonderful
I
outlet
love
for
it.
you? Like
I think
having
Sarah
that
froze
kind of
there.
way to be creative and to express yourself. How has that been for you? Because I know you said it was a lot going through your program, which Cindy and I mean, we did not get our PhDs, but we were in grad school, and I can only imagine the PhD program you were in. And I know you mentioned all of those things. How has music been? What has your relationship with music been like in your healing journey?
Um, it's not music itself. It's the making of music
Okay.
and my connection to composers when I analyze scores, me and the score, sitting at the keyboard, singing through lines, analyzing the relationships of harmonies and rhythms, and coming to understand what a composer is saying, and coming to hear and recognize myself in a composer who's from a different part of the world than me, from a different time in history than me, and seeing how universal these expressions are. That is really powerful for me. And also the act of sharing in a moment of creation with a chorus. A lot of people get this from singing in a choir. I never did, but when I'm conducting an ensemble and I'm acting as this kind of conduit from composer to ensemble to audience, and I'm part of that system, it makes me feel like I'm enormous and vast, but also a tiny piece of something infinite at the same time,
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
which is not a sentence that 9-year-old me would think that that's like way
Yeah.
too touchy-feely woo-woo to like
Yeah.
be a thing that's true. And yet that is a core part of being human. That's one of the most
Mhm.
ecstatic and uplifting experiences that humanity has access to. And that is what music has meant most to me.
Oh,
I love it. Thank you for
I love
sharing
it.
that.
Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you. Can you share with our listeners what is next for you? Do you have any big plans, books, anything coming up?
Uh, yeah. I can't tell you,
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Well, we'll just
but it's
we'll
I don't
wait.
know when this will air, but the election was
Okay.
last week,
Yeah.
and the day after the election, I contacted my literary agent, who's contacting her publisher, so there's nothing settled, but like there's
Okay.
plans.
Okay.
Well,
I
we would
can't say
love to
anything
have
yet
you
because
back.
nothing is settled. Yeah.
We will
Yes,
definitely be
please.
on the lookout, and we would love to have you come back and share
Yes.
because this has been just an amazing conversation. I've enjoyed it
Yes.
so much. I know
We've
Cindy
enjoyed it.
has.
Yeah. I will be smiling for the rest of the
Yes.
day, for the rest of the week because of this. We just appreciate you so much. Can you share with our listeners where can people find out more about you, about Emily?
Emily is on Instagram at E19,
Okay.
and there's also the Burnout Book Group is the book
Oh,
Instagram account, which actually her husband runs, but my
love
name might
it.
be on it. But I don't really do social media because
Okay.
it drains my soul.
Mhm.
Good
For people who are
self-awareness.
interested in autistic burnout, I made a YouTube channel and made a bunch of videos about the difference between the content in the book Burnout and the autistic burnout research, and like kind of expanding the content of the book to include neurodivergence.
Got it.
That's just the channel is called Autistic Burnout. If you
Yep.
search YouTube for Autistic Burnout Nagoski, Nagoski, it will
Okay.
eventually come up. Ads are disabled on that channel, so you do have to look for it because it's
Okay.
not going to get promoted on YouTube. Because I
Okay.
wanted to keep it small and niche and like kind of just for us sort of thing.
Yes. Okay.
But I did make a bunch of videos once I was diagnosed with autism, like being like, okay, what does the research say
Yeah.
about burnout and autism? And
Yeah.
talked about that for a while.
I love it. We will include that on our social media platform as well. And again, Amelia, we just thank you so much.
Yes.
We appreciate you. We appreciate your book. It's helped so many. It will continue to help so many. I recommend it to almost every client that walks through my door. So I just am
Cool.
so grateful for your time. Thank
Yes, we
you.
Cool.
appreciate you. Thank
Thank
you
you so
so
much.
much.
Yes.
We've
Yes.
enjoyed just the
It was lovely.
conversation, learning more. This has been so helpful. And thank you for just sharing your journey and your story and being so vulnerable with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so
Yes.
much.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.